Don't pack your suitcase. I already hid it. Those were the words that stopped Grace cold as she found Ethan curled in the closet, hugging her bag with trembling arms. He was just a child, but he knew. He knew she was thinking of leaving. In that moment, everything shattered. What kind of love makes a child cling to a suitcase in fear? What kind of choice forces someone to pick between their future and their found family? Stay with us, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about sacrifice, trust, and the courage it takes to love. Grace Morgan had never dared to challenge a billionaire before. But as she stood in the grand living room of the Blake estate, her eyes locked onto Andrew Blake's cold, sharp, and dangerous. She knew there was no turning back. "Sir, your son isn't autistic. He just needs love," she said quietly but firmly, her voice slicing through the tense silence like a scalpel. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of Andrew's luxury wristwatch. Then came the storm. "How dare you?" he growled, his voice low and deliberate. 36 specialists say otherwise? You are dismissed. Pack your things and get out of my house." Grace felt the world tilt. She needed this job desperately. It was the only way she could support her grandmother Helen and her younger sister Lily back in Willow Creek. But more than money, what broke her was the thought of leaving Ethan, the little boy who had looked at her that morning with those silent, pleading eyes as Grace knelt down to pick up Ethan's scattered toys from the marble floor. Her fingers trembled. Her dismissal was humiliating, yes, but not wrong. What was wrong was watching this 4-year-old boy be treated like a broken machine. Across the room, the therapist who had caused Ethan's emotional outburst stood smugly, tablet in hand. Didn't care. None of them did. To them, Ethan was a case. Grace was halfway to the door when it happened. "Daddy, don't let Grace go," came a small voice. Everyone froze. Andrew turned slowly, as if the world had shifted under his feet. Ethan stood there, eyes wet, clinging to his father's leg. The boy who hadn't spoken a full sentence in over a year had just spoken 7 perfect words. The therapist dropped her tablet with a clatter. Grace forgot to breathe. For a heartbeat, the entire mansion fell still. Andrew knelt down, stunned. "Ethan, what did you just say?" Ethan looked up at him with innocent desperation. "I want Grace to stay. She makes the monsters go away." The man who had built empires with his logic and crushed competitors with his words had none now. And Grace, still shaking, knew she had just witnessed a miracle. 2 weeks earlier, she had first arrived at Greenwood Hills. Stepping out of the cab with her thrift store shoes squeaking against the estate's polished floors, the massive house was intimidating, its silence thick and clinical. Mrs. Hargrove, the estate's longtime housekeeper, eyed her with barely concealed skepticism. "Last nanny left without notice," the woman had muttered while flipping through. Grace's resume. "Mr. Blake needs someone qualified. His son is complicated." "I have experience with special needs children," Grace had replied, showing her certification in early childhood education. "He was diagnosed with autism last year. His mother died during childbirth. Mr. Blake is very particular." What Mrs. Hargrove didn't mention, but Grace would learn soon enough, was that Mr. Blake ran his home like a boardroom, efficient, silent, and utterly void of warmth. The first time Grace saw Ethan, he was sitting alone in the garden, lining up toy cars, in perfect rows, while a white-coated therapist took notes from a distance. She wasn't speaking to him, not touching him, just observing. Something about his loneliness pierced Grace in a way she couldn't explain. It reminded her of herself after her parents' death, staring out a window, too young to grieve properly, too aware to feel safe. When Andrew Blake finally entered the room, Grace recognized him instantly, not from media photos, but from the emptiness in his eyes. He was handsome, powerful, and emotionally vacant. "Can you start today?" he asked flatly. After a 30-second interview, "Stick to the therapist's schedule.
Oh.
Don't deviate. And don't disturb me while I'm working." Just like that, she was in. Grace watched the therapist treat Ethan like a puzzle to solve. Rigid schedules, Reward charts, no eye contact, no hugs, no warmth. No one sang to him. No one read him stories. So Grace broke the rules. Quietly, tenderly, secretly. She sang lullabies from her hometown in North Carolina while bathing him, told him silly bedtime stories, held him when he screamed instead of managing his behavior. And slowly he responded. He began humming along, reaching for her hand, making eye contact until that therapy session, the one where the specialist pushed him too far. When Ethan screamed in panic, the therapist asked her to call Andrew, let him see the disruptive behavior. But Grace had reached her limit, so she said it. The truth no one dared to speak. Your son doesn't need more routines. He needs to feel loved. And now here they were, Ethan begging his father not to let Grace go. Andrew rose slowly, smoothing the creases in his tailored suit. His voice was controlled, but his eyes had changed. You may stay, he said to Grace, for now. But you will follow every medical directive, and I want cameras in Ethan's room. I'll be watching. Grace nodded, hiding the flicker of relief in her chest. As Andrew turned to the therapist, his voice sharpened again. I want a full report on what just happened tomorrow morning. Grace knelt by Ethan, whose tiny fingers curled into her sleeve. Thank you for defending me, champ, she whispered. You're so brave. For the first time, Ethan looked her directly in the eyes. And that night, as Grace tucked him into bed, she saw a tiny red light glowing in the corner of the room. A newly installed camera. She looked into it and smiled. Do you think Grace did the right thing by standing up to Andrew, even though it cost her job? Grace tried to ignore the small red camera light glowing above Ethan's bed. But every time he smiled, every time he looked her in the eye or reached for her hand, she could feel Andrew Blake watching from behind the lens. Still, she didn't let it stop her. She sang to Ethan in soft tones, gently combed his curls after his bath, and whispered stories into his ear as he drifted to sleep. The mansion remained as cold and silent as ever, but inside Ethan's bedroom, something had started to grow. Trust, warmth, and the flickers of something like hope. In the days that followed, Grace walked a tightrope. During the hours therapists were present, she obeyed every instruction. She followed routines, used charts, avoided eye contact when told. But when the therapists left and the house fell quiet, she returned to her own instincts. She played music, taught Ethan how to hum along. Once, she caught him clapping his hands offbeat to a silly song, and it made her cry in the pantry where no one could see her. One afternoon, while reorganizing Ethan's closet, she stumbled upon a dusty box of unopened musical toys.
Oh.
Inside was a small plastic flute. She cleaned it off and casually offered it to Ethan after lunch. Want to try? To her amazement, Ethan grabbed it eagerly and began to blow into it with wild, squeaky enthusiasm. You're a natural, she laughed, clapping, along with his chaotic notes. That night, she snuck her grandfather's old guitar into the mansion. It wasn't much to look at, but the strings still held their tune. She played softly for Ethan after dinner while he sat beside her on the rug, mesmerized. Would you like to learn? She asked gently. He nodded without speaking, but never looked away from her hands. What neither of them knew was that Margaret Blake had just returned from her European trip and had been watching through the half-open doorway with a face like carved marble. The moment she stepped into the room, the music died. What's going on here? She snapped. These toys are not part of Ethan's therapeutic program. Grace stood quickly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Blake. I know exactly what you were doing. The older woman interrupted. You were interfering with a carefully designed medical regimen. Before Grace could defend herself, a voice spoke from behind the hallway wall. I authorized it, said Andrew. He stepped into the room with his hands casually in his pockets. He'd been watching through the cameras. His expression was unreadable. Andrew, Margaret hissed. This woman is undermining progress. What progress, Mother? I cut in. Ethan didn't speak a single full sentence for over a year. He cried through every therapy session. And now he plays music. He talks. He smiles. So maybe, just maybe, it's not the charts and routines doing it. For the first time, Grace saw Margaret falter. Her gaze flicked to Ethan, who clutched the flute. Like a security blanket. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe, Andrew replied, but for once, I'm willing to make it. Later that night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Rain hammered the mansion's windows and the lights flickered twice before stabilizing. Grace was just finishing a book in the hallway when a shrill cry echoed from Ethan's room. She raced in to find him trembling beneath his blanket, eyes wide with fear. It's okay, she said softly, sitting beside him. It's just the rain. He crawled into her lap and clung to her shirt. She began to hum a low, soothing melody from her childhood and rocked him gently until his sobs calmed. Chocolate helps, she whispered. Want to make some? Ethan looked up at her and nodded. They tiptoed to the kitchen. Grace prepared cocoa on the stovetop, adding cinnamon the way her grandmother used to. As they stirred the pot together, a quiet cough behind them startled her. Andrew stood in the doorway, wearing a robe over his pajamas. Ethan had a nightmare, she explained. We're making hot chocolate. He hesitated before sitting at the island counter. Mind if I join? Grace blinked, then nodded. Of course not. They sat in the kitchen, the three of them, sipping cocoa while thunder rumbled outside. Ethan had a chocolate mustache, and for the first time, Andrew laughed. Freely laughed watching him. This, he murmured, almost to himself, feels like something we lost a long time ago. A few days later, after persistent nudging from Grace, Andrew agreed to a second medical evaluation for Ethan. The new specialist spent hours with the boy, reviewing his history and interacting with him gently. At the end of the visit, the specialist sat across from Andrew and Grace, hands folded. Mr. Blake, he said, your son does not meet the criteria for classic autism. His behavior is consistent with selective mutism and trauma-induced attachment issues. What he needs isn't medication. He needs safe, consistent emotional connection from the right person. He's already responding. Grace held her breath. Andrew didn't speak. He only looked through the glass wall of the office at Ethan, who was playing quietly in the corner with a small xylophone. That right person, the doctor added, might already be sitting beside you. In the car ride back to the mansion, the silence was heavy. Then Andrew spoke, eyes still on the road. You were right, he said simply. About all of it. Grace didn't answer. She just looked out the window, heart pounding. That night, as she helped Ethan into bed, he asked, Are you going to stay? Grace knelt down beside him. Do you want me to? He nodded, whispering, You make the house less scary. As she closed his door, she found Andrew standing in the hallway. He looked tired but different, lighter, human. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Any of it. Parenting, emotions, trusting people. But I'd like to try. Grace wasn't sure what to say, so she just nodded, then walked past him into the quiet. But for the first time since entering Greenwood Hills, she felt something shifting in the walls of that cold mansion. Something real. Only time would tell. What would you do if someone told you that love could heal what medicine could not? You believe them, or walk away? It happened just before dawn. Grace was quietly folding Ethan's tiny shirts in the nursery when she realized his small travel bag was missing. Confused, she opened the closet wider, only to find the boy curled up in the corner, hugging the missing suitcase to his chest, his cheeks damp with tears. What are you doing here, sweetie? She whispered, kneeling beside him. I don't want you to leave, Ethan choked out. I hid your bag. If you can't pack, you won't go. Grace froze. She hadn't told him about the job offer in Asheville. She hadn't said a word. But somehow, the child knew. Moments later, Andrew appeared in the doorway. His eyes widened when he saw his son on the floor, clutching the suitcase like a lifeline. Grace stood slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. The three of them looked at one another in aching silence, as if some invisible truth had finally been laid bare. They were no longer just nanny, father, and child. They were a family at risk of falling apart. For 3 days, the mansion was wrapped. In silence, Grace stayed but barely spoke to Andrew. She spent her time with Ethan, helping him with reading games, letting him pour the pancake batter, playing his favorite music. The job offer sat untouched in her drawer. She didn't know whether to accept or fight for something that had never even been promised. Then one morning, Andrew called her into the nursery. "Ethan, can you go see Mrs. Hargrove for a minute?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, but nodded, and slipped out. Andrew turned to Grace, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving tonight," he said without preamble. Her heart stopped. "What?" "I'm going on a trip, just for 2 days. There's something I need to do for us. I know I should explain, but I need you to trust me. Please don't make any decisions until I come back." And just like that, he was gone. That night Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She tried to focus on the job offer, the salary, the security, the distance, but every time she looked at Ethan curled up beside her with his hand in hers, her heart splintered. The next evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, her phone rang. It was Lily Grace. She sobbed through the speaker. "I got it. I got the scholarship. Full ride, all of it, tuition, books, housing. I'm going to be a doctor." Tears filled Grace's eyes. For years, she had worked herself raw to keep Lily's dreams alive. Now, they were finally real. She didn't have to sacrifice her heart for financial survival anymore. She could choose. Later that night, as Grace passed the hallway, she saw a figure waiting in the shadows. It was Margaret Blake. "I'd like a word," she said coolly. Grace followed her to the study. There the woman poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one over. "I've been watching," Margaret said. "Lucas, Ethan, is brighter, happier. That's because of you." Grace said nothing, unsure if this was gratitude or a prelude to something darker. "I also know about your offer," Margaret continued, "and I won't stop you if you take it. In fact, I have arranged another higher-paying job at one of the best private academies in the country. Far from here, of course." Grace blinked. "You're trying to buy me out?" "I'm giving you an exit before things become messy, before hearts break." Grace stood up slowly, her voice firm. "I didn't come here looking for hearts to break, Mrs. Blake. I came for a job, but I found something else. Your son, your grandson, a home. I won't walk away from that just because it's inconvenient." She left the study with her pulse pounding, and didn't see the soft look Margaret gave her back. 2 days later, just before sunrise, the front gates opened. Andrew had returned, but instead of entering through the main doors, he stood waiting by the garden steps, holding something wrapped in cloth. Grace was stepping outside when she saw him. "I went to Willow Creek," he said simply, "to see your grandmother," what she told me. A story about a man who gave up his inheritance for the woman he loved. About building a life brick by brick between 2 very different worlds. He opened the cloth. Inside were architectural drawings. "I sold the mansion," he said. "Bought a piece of land between here and Willow Creek. We're building a new home. There's something that belongs to all of us. And I want you to help me build it. Not just the house. Everything." Her breath caught. "There's more," he said. "I started a foundation. For children like Ethan, based on what you taught me, the Blake Morgan Center for Child Development. And if you'll say yes, I want you to run it with me." Tears spilled freely down her face. "But only if you stay," he whispered. "Not as an employee, not as a guest, as my partner. In all things." Then he knelt. "Grace Morgan, will you build a life with me?" Behind him, Ethan peeked from the doorway, holding the toy flute she'd given him that first week. He blew a wobbly little note and whispered, "Say yes." Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes to everything." Months passed. The new house rose like a promise out of the ground. Ethan's laughter echoed through halls still under construction. One spring afternoon, under the jacaranda tree, Andrew had insisted on transplanting from the old mansion. Grace, Andrew, and Ethan sat together drawing plans in the dirt for their future. They didn't need the world's approval. They had chosen each other. And it had all started the day Grace looked into the eyes of a powerful man and dared to say, "Your son doesn't need a diagnosis. He just needs love." And now, love was exactly what they lived in, loud, messy, imperfect, but entirely real. What about you? Did this story move your heart? Type 100 in the comments if you believe love can change everything. Left what country you're watching from, and don't forget to share. This story was someone who needs a little hope.